Hey everybody, this is C-Dub of Rockstar Pro. We're going to do a little special event. We got quite a few people here in the room, and we're still just standing around and stuff, just talking. So we figured we'd do another little thing here. Every once in a while, we're going to put together a group of us and call it a Rockstar Pro Roundtable. You know, throw a couple subjects out and just see where everybody's thoughts are on everything. I'll be kind of the narrator or the JR / if you haven't seen like Legends of Wrestling, kind of still that.
Moderator.
Kind of still that, yeah. So I'm going to go around, everybody introduce yourself and everything, and we'll go from there. Tron?
Yeah, Tron is what they call me. Certain people, other people call me SG1, Scary Gary.
This is Gigi from the office at Rockstar Pro.
And this is Gary Gnu, local music writer and wrestling fanatic.
This is Ben, who does the show with SG1, and I just do stuff, hang around.
Co-host of Real Alien Talk.
Yeah, I guess you want to give people titles. No, I'm the host. He can be the co-host.
We're exactly a minute 9, and she started.
I am not the Lord Alfred Hayes on the podcast.
You are Lord Alfred Hayes.
No.
You do the website. I just do the show. I'm the star, man.
Hey, what's the name of the show? It's right, Alf.
Yeah.
Real SG1
So
talk.
does this mean I could be the Mean Gene Okerlund of the show?
Yeah. All right. So this is C-Dub, and one of our first questions, kind of thoughts and stuff. We were kind of just being thinking stuff. And first question I want to throw out there is, if Hogan didn't exist, who would have been the man? Who would have been that top wrestler? And I know most people have been like Flair, so I'm even going to step it up more and be like, Flair and Hogan don't exist. Who would be either the man to be the top? Because I consider Flair and Hogan the top guys, and even Hogan kind of pop culture wise, the guy. You know, so if those two didn't exist, what would have happened either in WWE or in WCW NWA? Thoughts? Anybody want to start
First of all, do we consider the fact that other guys can move, or just consider the guys where they naturally were, just minus those guys?
Let's go with where everybody was. You know, now if you want to make a major move where like Vince would have went after this person, obviously,
Or decide to give this guy a push from where they were at that time.
Yeah, so let's go with everybody where they're kind of lined at. Let's say,
If you think about how long Hogan's run was, like who else might have been the main eventer or the top guy if you take Hogan out of that equation?
Mm-hmm. Or how long would the AWA even lasted if you take Hogan out of the equation?
Sure, that's an important thing to think about. Like, I think a lot of people forget Vince McMahon kind of built the early WWF off of AWA. Like, he took Mean Gene Okerlund. Like, several key components came from AWA, you know?
Because they had television.
Yeah,
you know, he
national.
He tried to gobble up the most recognizable names.
Mm-hmm. So he went back to each territory. He had their main guy, you know. Mm-hmm. So if he went through Chicago, you know, he had whatever top AWA guy, Jesse Ventura or whoever, you know.
Well, he would also go to TV stations and go, "Oh, how much does the local company pay you? Oh, $1,200 a week. I'll pay you $2,000 or $2,500 a week. Air my shit."
Mm-hmm.
So maybe let's say. Let's just start with Hogan. Since we're all start with Hogan. Wait, if Hogan didn't exist, who would have been that guy? A lot like the dirt sheets always say. You know, Hacksaw Duggan was one of the guys that was supposed to be the next guy, and then he did a couple things that kind of fucked that up. You know, in my opinion, I don't know if he could. Hacksaw had charisma, and he definitely could kind of work in the ring, but like I don't know if he had that pop culture. You know,
absolutely
like
not.
he being like Super Nanny or where the hell was like Ando, you know.
But if we're going there, then like a lot of people would think the obvious choice if Hogan didn't exist in WWF in the 80s, Macho Man would have been the centerpiece of the company.
That's who I said. My guess would have been Macho Man, because you look at like that wrestler. When you think the whole gimmick, everything, it's Macho Man.
Macho Man arrived at that level despite Hogan. You know, Hogan was on top all those years, and Macho was, you know, right underneath him as the number 2 guy forever, and he eventually became the guy. So I think he would have become the guy sooner.
Oh, clearly. I mean, there's a reason why he had such a connection with mainstream audiences, even to this day. Like, I walked into Meijer a couple weeks ago, and I saw Macho Man T-shirts there. Mm-hmm. I'm like, what the fuck is this? Mm-hmm. I mean, he just has that appeal.
It's retro, and like you said, pop culture, from the commercials and everything else. If you ask the average person on the streets who isn't necessarily a wrestling fan, if you ask the average non-wrestling fan to do an impression of a wrestler...
Oh, they're doing Macho Man.
They do Macho Man or Hogan.
Or Ultimate Warrior, too.
If you ask the average person...
That's later, but nowadays...
I think the average person, I think it's either... it's usually either Macho or Hogan. You get the brother, and you get the oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know a lot of people go around, like, if you go woo, you know, and like...
That's true. Ric
Flair.
And even the WWE, when they had their countdown show, they voted woo as, like, the number one saying.
Yeah, 50 years from now.
Yeah. I wonder which one is larger, oh yeah, or woo.
See, the woo, because it's become so tied to Flair's chop, I think that 50 years from now, when somebody does a chop, the crowd will still woo. And you'll have the announcers of the future will put over, like... JR putting over the Luthez press.
So what do you think Hogan's is his brother?
The hand to the ear.
But what's his verbal?
What you gonna do?
What you gonna do? What you gonna do is his.
And brother.
Let me tell you something.
I think brother is his catchphrase.
Yeah, he had the formula. It always started
Say
with,
your prayers to your vine.
let me tell you something.
Yeah,
and it was always, let me tell you something, brother. Let me tell you something, me, Gene. And then, it always would rap with the brother.
I think if you stop the average person on the street and say, do a Hogan impression, if they know who Hogan is, they'll go, brother, or like, you know, I think that would be like the first words out of their mouths, probably.
See, nowadays, though, I think it's because we have a different perspective, because, you know, we've talked about that before. We're in our 30s, so we're old guys. So, you know, a lot of the younger guys, you know, their first person that they do an impression of, their first big wrestling, you know, pop icon might be Stone Cold and The Rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's go around here. What's well, I didn't know which end I wanted to start with. So who would have been, if Hogan didn't exist, who would have been that top guy in WWE?
Probably for the time period, probably would have been Macho Man.
See, Macho Man. What about if Flair didn't exist?
If Flair didn't exist, you still had Dusty Rhodes. You got to think about who pushed who to get their name up.
But hang on, I want to clarify something here. When you say like if Flair didn't exist, you mean who would be that top heel that?
Well, obviously, when you say pro wrestling,
you
say pro wrestling, I think.
But he was popular with the ladies.
The people who don't know about wrestling, if you say Flair or Hogan, those guys broke that ceiling. They're pop culture, and Flair is pop culture. You go to any bar in America and go, woo! There's gonna be some drunk asshole going woo back at you. You know, so when I say, maybe not the best, that capable of wrestler or cut the best promos, but I mean, you know what I mean, broke that ceiling into pop culture.
Okay, all right, gotcha.
As far as Flair,
and I could see Macho Man and I could see Dusty both.
Well, I mean
Dusty kind of did, because people will do
Dusty Rhodes, but he's you know, he's a good guy. Flair is more known as a bad guy because he pushed more good guys. Mm-hmm. So it has to be. So in my opinion, I think I probably Tully Blanchard.
Ooh. That's
a great call. Tully's one of my all-time favorites.
Same character, similar.
He could have fit that role as a player.
I can see Tully Blanchard go. Woo,
Tully was. That's how the Horsemen got put together, because they were all like the most over heels.
Mm-hmm. And I could see Tully being in like your CBS weekly sitcom TV show.
Tully was doing the Horseman thing before the Horsemen existed. Yeah. Remember, he would do vignettes where he's drinking champagne with models and he's in suits, and they're very, very 80s when you see it. But
there could have been 4 Horsemen with Tully Blanchard as the leader.
Yo, totally.
Tully was the guy. Who was it in one of the documentaries? Shawn Michaels said that he was the first cool bad guy.
Yeah, no, he was.
And he was the guy that got so much heat that even the towns where they wanted to cheer the Horsemen, they would cheer Flair and they would cheer Arn, and they'd still boo Tully.
Yeah, and Tully, and the bad thing is Tully, it was kind of his fault at the end of his career. You know what I mean? If the guy didn't kind of have his own demons to deal with, he probably would have went way longer and probably could have climbed a lot higher.
That's another thing to think about. Like, if these people got pushed to be the star, how much of it would have been their own fault if they didn't make it?
I think Flair had a bit of head on his shoulders, but I think if a company sees money really behind a guy as one of their guys, they will do what they can do to protect that guy and make sure the stays going.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I think if Tully was in Flair's position at that point in time,
they would put more effort.
They might have put more effort into making sure he was staying straight. But Tully Blanchard's one of those guys wearing sunglasses, a suit, just band-aids over his fucking eyes, looking like he got the shit beat out, and talking about how classy he is. This guy has ass beat. It doesn't matter. I still got the belt. Fuck you. People won't come see me next week. Ass beat. In the early
NBA, just as many matches that were as amazing with Tully as there was with Flair.
Easily. And I can see Tully taking a Steamboat feud. Be phenomenal.
Any of the guys,
Dusty Rosen's Tully, phenomenal.
Any of those guys that you saw Flair having those monumental feuds with, you could see Tully having the same feuds with.
One of 10 matches I will always remember for the rest of my life is the Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard fucking match in the cage. Where Magnum TA is just stabbing him. I saw when I was like, that was the
early advent of hardcore in the United States. You know, you didn't see crazy gimmick matches with blood and you know. When Valentine and Piper had the dog collar match, that was like the most brutal thing ever at that point.
I remember that. But I mean, the Tully and Magnum, that's one to this day. I still, if anyone was like, "What do you think was like hardcore?" So I'm like, "This could be one of the starts of where this shit really started."
Well, let's keep them. Those good ones, man. Macho Man and Tully are two. Now those two, who you think would have topped
Tully Blanchard?
You think Tully would have eventually? They both get
bigger than Macho.
Bigger than Macho. They both get that big of a push.
I think he would have. One's a bad, one's a good. It's hard to compare.
I think Tully would have been a great candidate to be the guy who was in Flair's position. Because he was a great worker. He got heat. You know, people hated him, but he had this cool vibe about him. Like he had that marketability.
I mean, the ultimate payday would be Tully Blanchard versus Macho Man in like a WrestleMania or big belt feud or something. I think it would have been fucking phenomenal.
So you think Tully could have pulled off when he finally got around to doing the Hogan-Flair feud? Like it was Hogan-Tully?
See, I don't think it would have been Tully in the WWE. You got to think what Vince liked and what Vince wanted to market. Like,
well, Tully was a small guy. Tully was a small guy. So was Macho, kind of, but Tully was a smaller guy.
See, if you take Hogan out of the equation, like I think Steamboat might have been bigger. I think.
Hold on. Let's say
Steamboat's. We're talking about a heel character.
Well, no, not at all. We're talking about either Flair or
okay.
I think Vince, I think he wanted an Adonis. He wanted a cartoon character. He wanted an action figure. He was a big, ripped, jacked up guy.
Well, since we're leading this, let's go with yours, Gigi. Who, if Hogan and Flair didn't exist?
Yeah, see, it's a hard call, but I think Steamboat was
Steamboat would have been the WWE guy
because he was so likable and was such a great babyface, and he had the physique.
But what about talking?
He's the ultimate face.
What about talking with him? He never learned for like cutting like crazy long promos.
Yeah, but you know, it was a different era. I think he was an ultimate good guy. I think it would have been interesting to see what he could have done as a heel.
He left in and out of the company.
But could you see him also as the guy who doing Suburban Commander movies and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I could have seen him being like an action hero in the 80s. You know, and I mentioned this when we were talking about doing this roundtable, and I started thinking about this question. I was like, who else would it be? Maybe somebody like a Rick Martel. Yeah, the model. He was AWA champion, and again, he was that ripped guy that, you know, Vince loves bodybuilding, and he wants his guys to look a certain way, be a certain size. Yeah. So I think it would have been somebody with a chiseled physique, but yeah, a lot of those guys couldn't talk. So maybe, you know, that's why Hogan was who he was when he was. He was huge. Hogan was what? Like, isn't he legit? Like 6'6"? Yeah. I think he was billed as 6'8" or something. And 280 pounds, you know, massive. I remember the first time I saw a live event and saw Hogan in person. It was NWO period. We talked about this on a different podcast. I never, you know, had any family that would take me to go see it. I just always got to watch wrestling on TV. So the first time as an adult going and seeing Hogan in real life, going, oh, okay, now I get it. Mm-hmm. He's huge. Mm-hmm. He's just a mammoth human being. Mm-hmm. And when you see those arms and you just see how big he is, and you see the Hollywood way that he works a room, you're like, okay, I understand. You know, that's what Vince was looking for. So yeah, it is a real intriguing question. Now, who would have filled that role?
What about for NWA, WCW? Who would have been there? Flair wasn't there.
Tully is I really agree with that. I think that might have been Tully. It could have also maybe have been Arn, but the way Arn developed,
Arn wasn't as big a talker
Yeah,
as
he's underrated talker.
Well, he is.
Go back and watch some Arn promos.
Well, I think look who he was surrounded by too. He's surrounded by tall and
more
big.
I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna punch you in the fucking face than style and profiling.
Well, it would have just been a
That was
different
his
kind of
gimmick, though. He was the enforcer.
Exactly. No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I could see him on your sitcom detective show on network television.
Yeah, when you think about the
Shield or
marketing,
something.
Yeah.
you know, like, because when you think about Vince's image of the big jacked up bodybuilder guy, like, would Ultimate Warrior have ever even gotten into wrestling had Hogan not sort of changed the industry?
That's why I wondered too. How many wrestlers would not have been in the industry if they didn't see a person like Hogan have success?
Yeah, because most wrestlers were big guys, but not really chiseled. They didn't have abs. They were, we're here in the studio. We have the network on in the background, and you can see. You watch that old footage, and before the 80s were the steroid years. Everybody had to be bigger, bigger, bigger. Prior to that, it was just some big, rugged dudes who weren't necessarily, ripped physiques. They just were big, tough guys that could fight.
And I think when you look at the difference between the WCW, NWA, WWE, obviously WWE had all the much bigger, huge. I mean, there wasn't muscular guys in the other show, but they had the gorillas were on WWE to say, what I mean? Well, that's so you're going with Steamboat. And
I just thought of something. Maybe the 80s, maybe culturally we might not have been ready for it. But another candidate who I think could have been that big baby face, Junkyard Dog.
That's true. Ooh. That's true because he was immense. I mean, and
he talk.
Dude, and he's one of those guys going back and watching old footage from like the network and stuff. And you're like, man, I used to love the JYD, but when you watch him actually in the ring, he didn't do a whole lot in the ring.
No, when they did Hogan.
Well, Hogan, if you go watch, it depends who's Hogan's wrestling.
Oh, okay, fair enough. That's fair.
Hogan was trained in Japan. Hogan can work.
I mean,
he just
look how great Buddha versus Hulk Hogan.
It was an amazing match.
You'll see him work.
I do with the Butcher and Hulk Hogan.
It's an awesome match.
So let's we're trying. I'm trying to keep this moving. So Gary, let's go with yours. If Hogan wasn't the man. He didn't even exist.
Yeah.
Not even exist.
Yeah.
Or Flair.
He's in another galaxy.
Okay, well,
yeah.
I gotta go with Macho Man. Macho Man has proven over years. I mean, since he's obviously he passed away and and he stopped wrestling. Probably in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
He's had an enduring legacy and appeal to people outside the wrestling world, and much the way Hogan has. Now,
he was in Spider-Man.
Yeah, and obviously we can't forget about the damn Slim Jim commercials.
Obviously.
And he just had that appeal. He had that it factor, something you couldn't put your finger on. And again, it appealed to so many different people, not just wrestling fans. So that one is clearly savage. To me.
What about the NWA?
This is
WCW. This is the one I think is more trickier.
Yeah, I think this is definitely trickier. And you know what? I can't come up with a clear answer. However, with that said, if we're not talking about companies right now, let's just say Flair in the industry did not exist. I would say that guy, that heel who could have had mainstream appeal, in my opinion, is Roddy Piper.
Yes.
Piper could talk. He had a magnetic personality. Even if you hated that guy, you wanted to hear what he was going to say.
Piper's career paralleled Flair and Hogan because Piper and Flair kind of came up together and worked together a lot. And before Piper went to work for Vince.
Yeah.
So
he was in WCW too before he was in WWE.
So
So you think you're going with Piper could have probably filled the mega heel role that Flair did.
And he did really, because if you think about it, he was WWE's top heel.
Could Piper be the head of the Horsemen?
Absolutely. The dude has the gift of gab. In my opinion,
think about that for a second, folks. Piper, Ole, Arn, and Tully.
I think
and JJ Dillon.
But see, it might have been. You never know. Like we mentioned,
Tully would have had to been the dress up.
We mentioned Arn a little bit ago, but if you remember, Arn was the young guy in that crew.
Yeah.
Arn was like the blue chipper that kind of looked like Ole, so they said, hey, we'll say he's an Anderson. And Flair was billed as being a cousin of the Andersons to get that heat. So he immediately is brought in and everyone hates him because he's related to the Andersons. So, like,
it still real does.
If that story hadn't happened and you didn't find out, these guys are all vaguely related, would the Horsemen have come together? Like, it might have been a different component of top guys.
I think this is a different topic for a different time. I mean, I think it's a great question, though. Yeah. But to answer Chad's question, I totally think Piper could have been the head of the Horsemen.
You think he would have done this? He could have pulled off the suit?
I actually think he might have.
Piper, when he went to the Los Angeles area, before he went to the Fed again, he wore the suits, the chains. He was the woo kind of guy.
He wore like a plaid
he went back to the East. But when he went back to the East Coast, when he was like, "I'm the Piper, I'm the brawler" type shit. That was completely East Coast. Even when he was in WCW before,
he wasn't WCW.
Yeah, that's right. John Crockett production. He was the rugged guy, always on the East Coast. Like, I'm the fucking Irish fighter, even though he was Scottish.
Right. Also, let's not forget this. Piper was in the movie They Live.
Oh yeah.
So he did have. I mean, he did have some outside of the wrestling industry.
He could have been that guy who was on your weekly detective show on CBS.
Sure,
or
why not?
Right.
Okay. He was a great character and a great talker. Absolutely.
And Tron.
I think one more point to go back to talking about Ricky Steamboat earlier. Say if Hogan was taken out of this equation, that's what we're going with.
Yeah.
He was in another galaxy. He's not here.
Yeah, he doesn't exist.
Mama Hogan didn't...
A parallel universe, he's over there, not in this one. Say, if they're forced to push somebody else, with Ricky Steamboat in the 1980s, you think about kind of the culture of that time. There was like Chuck Norris, Kung Fu was really big.
Karate Kid.
Yeah, Kung Fu movies. Like everyone was totally into that. You
Yeah.
know, you had like Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow and G.I. Joe. So that was really big. I think
Yeah,
if they
Escape from New York and shit.
if they had to push him more, I think they could have got a lot more out of him. Yeah.
Yeah.
But still, I think to be the very head of WWF at that time, I think it had to be like a very over-the-top personality. So I would definitely have to go with Savage.
Savage.
It would still have to be a guy. And I think without Hogan there, too, I think they would have put even more on him. And he could have led to movies like Paul Kotcher, stuff like that.
See, the only thing I'm having as being the guy saying, I don't know if it would have been Savage, was Vince obsessed with guys having to be fucking monster. Huge.
Yeah.
And would he put that much effort into a number one guy where Savage was on like the smaller end at the time for WWE? And I think that's the only thing that keeps me from saying, you guys are absolutely right. It would have been Savage.
And maybe that was it. Maybe that's why he didn't always reach the higher level he should have, because that's how Vince, to this day, Vince still wants the big guy.
Even when he broke into Fed, he had like a months-long winning streak.
Hogan was a freak of nature, though. Hogan was like the Brock of his day. Like, Hogan was just this big genetic monster. He was just naturally so much bigger than everybody. Vince Sr. Supposedly said that, you can't make him a babyface. They say he's too big and people will see him as a bully. And that's why Hogan always had the big monsters. They always put him against, Big John Studd, King Kong Bundy, Andre, because how else can you paint 6'8", 300 pounds?
It had to be someone perceived as bigger than Hogan that could actually inflict damage.
So if Hogan hadn't come along and changed that size perspective, he was so big that, look at the champions before him. I think that Savage or Steamboat or any other talented, smaller guy could have made it.
I think so too. I just think it was just in Vince's eyes. He had this look in his mind of what his champion looks like,
and he still has it up until recent years.
He does, and it's like
a certain guy.
Unfortunately, man, you can be as main as you want, but the guy who hires you has this look of a monster. He's going to stay with that look,
Right.
Well, I got my goal is to keep us on time here, so I get to my pick would have been interesting, and I was waiting for somebody to fucking name, especially the NWA, WCW guys' name. But I'll start with the WWE, and I think for one thing, Bob Backlund would have had a longer run, and I think it would eventually there would have been another heel. Gotten in maybe Iron Sheik, but I think Sergeant Slaughter would have been that guy in WWE.
That's a good pick.
As a face or a heel?
As the guy in WWE. And I think when it got to a time where he couldn't have, I think you would have had a guy like Ultimate Warrior or something that they would have been forced to make the guy. Or would have been Brett at that time when wrestling started changing in the early 90s. I think Brett would have taken that. But I think it would have went Backlund a longer run than Sergeant Slaughter, because Sergeant Slaughter can talk on that mic. He has that charisma. He's a big guy. Vince fucking loved him.
Yeah.
And then he also had that, like, commercialability.
Yeah, he was a G.I. Joe.
He was a fucking G.I. He had that commercialability to...
And don't forget, he had the appeal, the Everyman America gimmick.
Exactly. And I think at that time, that 80s, late 70s, early 90s, Sergeant Slaughter would have been the guy, but I think then you would have eventually, when it came to like the 90s and they had to change, it would have been like Bret Hart or somebody like that. At Perfect World, I think it might have been Mr. Perfect, because I think Mr. Perfect's a great wrestler and could cut it, and I could see him on Magnum PI at 8 o'clock at night on CBS.
Yeah, Kurt Hennig, if you remember in the AWA,
I don't think he would have done that.
No. In the AWA, he was the babyface hero.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you gave the torch to Mr. Perfect. He could have been the guy cutting Wheaties commercials and everything, but I think my choice would have been Sergeant Slaughter up to the 90s, and I think then it would have been...
It's a very important thing. Vince, too, wanted, like... At that time, he went very high on the Patriot American type. Whoever it might have been that was pushed was going to be heavy in that. So Slaughter could definitely fit into that upper echelon.
Now, my WCW NWA pick was Michael Hayes.
Oh, yeah.
Because I could see him fit right into that Flair role. Think in your mind, 4 Horsemen, Michael Hayes.
But the only thing is workmanship. Michael Hayes is no fucking Ric Flair in a ring at all.
I think Michael Hayes,
you can't
his gimmick, his character, he did enough in the ring that he didn't have to.
Yeah, but still,
that's what I mean. Flair is he could fucking go wrestle anybody and make him.
But
prior to the Horsemen,
he could be that guy that's your number one heel, your number one faction guy, the playboy guy that everybody fucking hates, and he could be on NBC Magnum PI.
Prior to the Horsemen, the Freebirds were the first stable in wrestling.
Easily.
Yep.
But they got by because he had the other guys.
Buddy Rose
and fucking
Terry Bam Bam Gordy.
Gordy, dude. That's who made that team. You had no Hayes. I love Hayes to death. One of the best.
But Hayes was the mouth
guy. But horrible, not good.
Well, I think
in the
if he was
ring.
a Horseman, he wouldn't have had to carry the wrestling load.
Even then, the promo ability could take you very far. Like,
totally.
Piper, awful wrestler, but he had created the excitement through the promos.
Great.
So Michael Hayes,
Piper, I always defend Piper. Go back and watch his match with Brett.
That's a real good match, but he's really good.
But you know what I mean. In general, he's not the best wrestler. His promo took him.
So I think as a consensus, we're leading to everybody would say as a group being outvoted, Macho Man would have been your Hulk Hogan.
But Slaughter was a great pick, though.
Yes, Slaughter was a good pick.
Because Slaughter was that guy. He literally was a G.I. Joe character.
Yeah.
And
I'm trying to think wrestling world and that other pop culture real world.
Maybe, and if Slaughter had the body that Hogan had, I think he would have been his spot.
If
like G.I. Joe, where they gave him the muscular body.
Besides in Japan, name one match that Hogan was ever really in that was like the Pat versus Sergeant Slaughter match.
It was a good match.
No ref.
Actually, I have one question.
Hogan never really had that type of shit. Since when we saw him watch Abdul the Butcher,
no man,
Abdul was stabbing the shit out of
Hogan
him.
Savage,
awesome match.
Hogan Savage, and then Hogan in his later run in his WWE return post NWO, he had a SummerSlam match against Shawn Michaels. Now you can make the argument like Shawn Michaels can carry anybody to a great match.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But there are some really good Hogan matches, but he's got to have the right opponent. He's got to be motivated.
I think it's the right opponent that he's willing to work with and stuff.
The Hogan Rock match was really good.
Actually, that was an excellent match, and it wasn't a work rate related match. It was just they just built it up in a way and pasted it in a way that kept the fans really hot for it.
They worked the crowd.
They worked the crowd. Yep, that's
coming to Japan. Going there, he knew he had to change the style.
Yeah.
Like the Muda match, I think it was like 92.
Dude, the Muda match,
he had to work a very different style. He was smart enough to know that. They demanded more out of the action.
I was a super asshole. Like Hogan can't work, and then I saw the Muda match, and I was like, I'm an ass. The man can work.
He can. He doesn't need to.
He doesn't need to.
Right.
And this is before I was actually in the business. As a little kid, and I was like, God, I can't watch Hogan. Blah blah blah. Yeah. Fire
Go
up.
back and watch.
But now I'm like, after Muda, I was like, damn.
Hogan, some like house show footage. If you go back and watch there's crap on the network and some of those Hogan collections, but some of those like house show matches where they weren't edited for TV and they would eat up a little time. Hogan and DiBiase had some really good matches. DiBiase, very underrated.
Sure.
Right.
Well, I want to keep us on some time here. We went really long.
Chad, I have one other question about your pick about Michael Hayes.
Yeah.
You know, if Flair didn't exist, he would have been that guy. Do you think he really would have had the mainstream appeal that Flair does?
I think,
or did.
I think if that much responsibility and money investment was put on him, like you said, there would have been more handcuffs put on him. Like people were on more of a security watch on him. He would have been
get Doc Hendricks out of your mind,
as he was.
Forget Doc Hendricks.
Please, that's horrible.
Yeah, just think,
but
sexy Michael Hayes and the Freebirds.
When a company invests that much money into you and they're looking to get like 10 years out of you,
yeah,
you're fucking you on lockdown. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, so.
And also at that time, like the 80s, you think about that like, MTV generation and all that. If you had a wrestler that could play that star, like Hogan kind of did with the Rock and Wrestling connection. Yeah. But Michael Hayes could have been just...
He could have even done more. I could see him on the fucking MTV Music Awards. Like, I'm Michael Hayes, you know?
Yeah.
Totally.
Point. Yeah.
Totally could. All right, well, let's move on to our second question here. And we're kind of staying the theme of if what happened if this didn't exist. So I'll stay with this theme. How would have the Attitude Era, or would have it even happened if there was no ECW to push it to happen?
Ooh.
Now, I know it had to do to WCW, but WCW was fucking watching ECW anyway.
Yeah.
If ECW did not exist, didn't happen, it stayed a fucking little tiny fucking thing that we never heard of. Mm-hmm. Let's say that like half their talent that we know was there didn't even go there because they couldn't afford them. What would happen with the Attitude Era?
We gotta think of.
Anyone want to start us?
I'll start. I think start this direction.
Go ahead.
I think around that time, like wrestling was just kind of in a lull, like all around.
Mm-hmm.
So I think enough time would have gone by where WWF would have realized they had to change some things, but it wasn't happening anytime soon. Like I think ECW definitely quickened it.
Would it have
made it change?
Would it have been extreme if it wasn't for ECW?
I don't know if it would have gone quite to that level, but they would have eventually realized like. You remember at that time, it was like storylines were just kind of passe. Like you had like the pirate stealing Bret Hart's coat, like feuds, dumb feuds like that.
Yeah,
and like the fans kind of wanted. At the time, they demanded like a more, I guess you'd say, mature product. I guess, kind of a lack of a better term, but it would have gone enough time where they eventually realized like we got to change some shit. Because, you know, as promoters in this room...
We're losing money.
If you start losing money, something's got to change.
Yeah, ECW caught fire because those fans were turning away.
Yeah, so they said, this is giving us what we want right now, and the main product isn't, so we're going to go here. So I think in enough time, there would have been some change, but I think ECW took it in that kind of extreme direction, you would say. But yeah, basically that's it. They would have changed. They would have had to make some changes sooner or later.
And how much of
longer?
Yeah,
in the making.
How much of it could have been tied to WCW? Because had Ted Turner not bought Crockett Promotions and launched WCW, you know, would ECW have stayed this little underground thing?
Right.
Because their stars and, you know, the cruiserweights and the luchadors and more hardcore stuff that WCW was stealing from them, you know, had they not had that platform, had they not been in the ratings war trying to compete with Vince, you know, would so much hardcore stuff have made it to American television, and would ECW have gotten as big as it was?
With WCW, too, like, it elevated what was happening in WWF eventually. Like, they were kind of like I said, in a lull. They're not feeling like we're just going to keep doing what we've always done. And then when you have a show, you know, on the same time slot as you, like, I mean, naturally, as a promoter, you want to have the best show. So it kind of elevates, you know, we're gonna try different things. We're going to see what works, you know, because we want to have the best show. You know, you don't want someone beating you in the ratings.
And plus, you have to go look back. Who else was feeding both those companies talent at that time? You know,
there really was no more like territory system at that
was
time.
Was there even like a power plant or anything at that point?
There was, but like where the old model where they used to get the top guy from a territory, like there were no territories back then. So a lot started. Once they took more notice of ECW, they started picking some of those guys. That was really the only farm system left.
Yeah, there was obviously other places around doing wrestling, but nobody obviously was, you know...
Yeah. Nobody was the heat magnet that ECW was.
The ECW was, because that talent had to go other places. You know what I mean? If ECW wasn't there, the talent obviously. Because I mean, I can only think of like was Mikey Whipwreck one of the originals? Like there was only a few guys who were like originals.
Yeah.
You know?
But you gotta say, in my opinion, if it wasn't for ECW, what made ECW so much was the workmanship, the writing, and the fans. In that area, you had companies like IWA, you had CZW that was doing, in my opinion, was doing crazy shit that like more crazier than ECW was doing, but their storylines weren't making sense. So what lacks in them is their storyline. But with some of those guys migrate because it was an East Coast thing. Same thing with ECWA. They were doing good stuff during, and things like I said with CCW and IWA. So you would have had that audience going to those feds because they were tired of the norm WCW. WWE
and that's my thing. That's what my thought is, that there would have been another company. The fans at that time, and I think we luck out because we were wrestling fans. We were part of that. Like we wanted a little something different. Like
I did.
I like WCW and NWA, but like WWF, every once in a while a guy would catch my eye, and I would still watch it being a wrestling fan, but like. I really was just tired of the fucking formula.
If you remember
back to that formula.
If you remember back to that time, what the feuds were and like what I mean, it was just kind of, it felt tired. Like you'd seen Hogan for so many years, and you see Dungeon of Doom. Don't get me wrong, I love Dungeon of Doom, but it wasn't quite. I mean, it's not really drawing new fans in. It's kind of the old standard.
Yeah,
and you guys
feed a heel to Hogan.
Paul Heyman, before he went to ECW, was in Windy City. If ECW or Smoky Mountain, I guess, existed with Windy City, maybe been like ECW. Yeah, the Chicago fan base was there. That,
or are we supposing Paul Heyman doesn't exist?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. ECW, because Paul Heyman would have went somewhere.
That's what I'm saying. Is really like the catalyst is Paul Heyman. Wherever Paul Heyman would have landed, would have became.
I think so.
That's smart. He was smart at the writing, and he was the one who he obviously gathered talent from outside areas.
Yeah, he obviously
and build characterization and all the stuff, you know, like as far as story writing and bringing adult situations to real life wrestling and saying this is what's really happening in my real life. Let's write about it, show these people, and they feel for me. Yeah. You know,
you think with ECW being the third kind of promotion, like a lot of the guys were kind of considered misfits that really couldn't work in WWF or WCW. So knowing that they weren't the best talent per se, or someone hadn't found out how to get the best results out of them, like he would accentuate the strengths, you know, and hide their weaknesses. So on the show, you know, if Public Enemy misses a spot or whatever, you just don't show that. You edit that, make them look awesome. And kind of, I guess, with that, like them, you would see maybe they weren't so awesome when they went somewhere else.
I think I'm ready to chime in.
Go ahead,
Gary. I kind of agree with what Tron over here said earlier, that eventually the product would have been forced to change because, you know, let's face it, the kids who grew up watching the 80s WWF were maturing. And, you know, these little, how should I put them, one-dimensional storylines, like good versus evil and USA versus Russia or whatever, it just, it was beyond, I mean, it was just like, no, we're past that. We're too old for that.
And I think at the time of the world, the line,
yeah, pretty much.
In real world at the time, in world, the lines crossed a lot. Like it wasn't always gray, black and white. It was a lot of gray there. You know what I mean?
You start seeing movies like Natural Born Killers or whatever, where it's not really, maybe the villain isn't the hero now. You know?
Yeah. So with that in mind, the product would have had to have changed. But I think, again, I agree with Tron earlier that ECW sped it up. Yeah. Because, again, they were just, it was so flashy and over the top. And I remember when I first discovered ECW, I had been out of watching wrestling for years. And then I got turned on to ECW. I saw some tapes. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. These guys are going through crazy shit to entertain these fans. And the fans were so rowdy and over the top. And they're just like, they had that X factor about them.
The company was actually listening to their audience.
Yep, they were listening to their audience.
They were like, holy shit, they tell us what they want, we just give it to them.
And Paul Heyman was astute enough to realize, like, hey, the fans are changing, the times are changing, let's do something different. And that's, and again, I think the evolution will have happened to WWF or WCW eventually. But, I mean, well, of course, the question stands then, would they even been in business by the time that change came around?
Yeah, because
it's an interesting question.
I mean, because WCW was obviously taking shit from ECW as well as WWE was, but WCW was kicking the shit out of WWE while doing it, you know. So
for 2 years.
Yeah, so it took, you know, a little bit more of them getting a little more of the ECW attitude, let's say, to beat WCW. So if they didn't have that, would have WCW just continued just to pummel them in the fucking ground?
Maybe.
You know?
But like you said, though, WCW took a lot of cues from ECW, like blurring the lines, like there aren't really good guys and bad guys.
Yeah.
That wasn't never really a thing in ECW. But they were already doing it. The NWO were like the anti-heroes.
It's changing the body type of a wrestler, making him a high flyer, and luchador can be successful in America.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and ECW helped, again, speed that process up.
So we'll come to agreement that ECW definitely sped that process up.
Absolutely.
But do we agree that there would have been a company that a few key players would have went to that would have eventually became a powerhouse that somebody would have had to listen to?
That's what made the company. It wasn't the letters. It was the crowd and the people who worked for it.
Something had to change at that point in wrestling, and maybe they would have had to be knocked out. If Vince would have had to, like, enough years gone by, like, okay, we got to change some shit, seriously. Like, maybe that it had to happen sooner or later. So
Actually,
whether it was ECW or... But I really think Paul Heyman was the key wherever he landed at. I mean, he was astute enough to...
You think he was going to be the spark wherever he went?
Yep, creatively, I think
would
so.
have went.
Yeah,
absolutely, totally agree with that.
Awesome. Well, let's do one more. We got a few more minutes here. This will be a quick one. A little different in the subject. Besides the WWE title, which is probably the most important title in wrestling, we can agree. If you hold that, you're probably, you know, whatever, by any means, you're the top guy.
You're the biggest attraction. You're the biggest.
Whether it's 2 belts, 1 belt, what the hell they have now, I don't. Is it 1 belt? Yeah, it's 1 belt.
Yeah, it's Lesnar's belt.
Besides that belt, what is the most important wrestling title in the world right now?
Ooh.
In the world.
Because I think, as America, it'd be really hard. Because people would say, well, the TNA, but I'm like... I want to answer my question bigger than that, but you got to put the world in, because the Japanese markets and European markets are bigger than some of our independents in the States. So, if anybody wants to start...
I already have my answer.
Go ahead.
It has to be the New Japan title. I mean...
The IWGP
heavyweight title.
So, I mean, if you think about... I mean, we talked about it earlier. It was like, you know, people aren't aware Hogan, you know, went to Japan to hone his craft and all this stuff. And so many other wrestlers have done that. Either they started their career there, or different points throughout their career, they go to Japan, refine their work. You know, and if you get over with that audience, I mean, Japanese wrestling audiences are... They look all polite and stuff, but they're really into it.
It's based off realism.
And again, like, so many people who have, you know, worked in Japan to hone their art. I mean, if you became champion over there, that's pretty impressive. So I think it has to be the New Japan title.
What is that? I think there's only been half a dozen Americans that have held it.
Yeah, I know it's not that many.
Go ahead, Gigi.
Yeah, but now there's a few different promotions in Japan fighting for that spot. So, but yeah, historically, the IWGP is a big one. Man, but then, you know, I don't know, AAA in Mexico.
That's why I was going. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just about when you're talking internationally, when you're talking about like around the world, not just the States. You know, there are guys that are huge stars and draw a lot of money and have successful careers wrestling in Japan or Mexico. So yeah, it's and then what's the other Mexican promotion? CMLL.
Yeah.
So
which has been in business like 80 some years.
Yeah,
so they have to be doing something, right?
So
yeah,
I mean, obviously,
yeah.
Yeah, in the world, it's one of the big 2 in Japan or one of the big 2 in Mexico.
I think I just have to agree. IWGP, like at this New Japan, I would say at this level.
Yeah.
I'd have to agree with either the World Heavyweight, the New Japan one, or CMLL, because there's only been like 12 to 15 people who's ever held the heavyweight title. First of all, CMLL.
Really?
So to be like an actual American and hold a CMLL heavyweight title, it probably doesn't make you the most money, but it's pretty fucking cool on your roster, I would say.
Yeah,
prestigious.
I'd have to go to the New Japan, the IWGP, just because they don't even really have a bunch of champions, and to be an American go there, like, and to hear they won America won the tag titles, or they won a heavyweight title. It even makes waves.
It's a
over
big
here,
deal,
so.
yeah.
Well, we're about done, guys. We actually we got 3 questions done.
Like one of the first American CMLL champions right now is Val Venus.
Oh shit! So,
Wow. Okay.
well, thanks everybody for coming and answering some questions and stuff, and we'll see everybody later. Thanks.
Later.